cocktail sessions, educational and inspirational talks from experienced startup founders, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders.
Hey guys. So who here in the audience runs a company? A lot of you. Awesome. That's perfect. Because I was thinking, I could talk about hacking business travel, or I could talk about how to ensure employees hack business travel, and this audience seems pretty apt for that. I think that we probably all have read a lot about the 21st century employee and the 21st century business traveler. And, we've read things like millennials consider quality of life and company culture to be ever more important, significantly more so than any prior generation in terms of where they work. Also, I was reading last week something really interesting that Skift, which is a kind of travel industry news and research outlet that I highly recommend you all follow on Twitter and click through and read their site. They put out their trends to watch in 2013 with regard to travel, and one of them was that business travel and leisure travel are getting very, very blurred, which I personally agree with. I'm like, yeah, I will go. I'm based in New York, and I will go on a trip to the Bay Area, and I will just get a later flight and instead spend the weekend in in wine country or something. I'm out there anyway, and my company's paying for the flight. Obviously, the weekend is on my own dime, but in terms of efficiency and in cost effectiveness, I find that great. So I find it no surprise that business and leisure travel are converging, particularly for younger professionals. But also, what they added there is they cited a stat that said there are now a majority of Americans who travel for business who do not have any kind of managed travel program at work. And that I found really, really interesting, because I've worked in environments where we had a managed travel program and we had to use it, or we ostensibly had to use it. Most of us just didn't, and realized that no one actually really cared as long as we weren't overspending. And I've also worked in large company environments where we did not have a managed travel program. And I find that one of the most empowering things that a company can put into its company culture. And so I wanted to give just a couple of really quick principles about how you can do that for your employees, encouraging them to think smart, think cheap, travel smart, while also still being able to travel the way that they want to, rather than saying you must fly this airline, you have to stay at this chain of totally stale big corporate hotels. I think there are two basic principles to that. The first one is that you have to incentivize. I think there have been way too many gamification startups out there. I think that a lot of them find that there is no real reason for people to want to rack up points or badges or that kind of thing. Don't get me wrong, I love Foursquare, but I think some people saw the success of Foursquare and kind of went a little too far with that. So when I say incentivize and turn business travel into a game, I think that there's a difference when you're doing that sort of thing with your company, where you can guarantee some level of success. And that's because I think gamification works and incentivization works when you have an existing community of people with whom there can be competition. And if you have an employee force, there's that community. So if you were incentivizing your employees, hey, if you're going to go cross country, here's your cap, here's your spending cap. If you go under that, you get points that you can redeem towards perhaps flying business at some point, if you accumulate enough of them, or towards some kind of recognition within the office. Depends on the company. But incentivizing, I think, I've seen in action, will actually will get your employees to travel smart and to not be racking up ridiculous expense accounts, and to instead find the way that they want to travel, and do it right and save your company money in the process, because they really feel incentivized to do so. If you make it public among their colleagues, like, hey, someone found a flight for even cheaper. Someone got this fire sale deal for a hotel. It was amazing, saved us a ton of money. So incentivizing, I think, is principle number one. Principle number two is choice. You're going to have happier employees, I said, if they are traveling heavily for business. I personally travel 3 months out of the year. I'm on the road, mostly for work. And depending on what your company does and who the employees are, they may travel just as much, they may travel less. But when you're concerned about quality of life at a startup, as most companies in our world are, you want to consider keeping them happy while traveling. So when you offer them choice, you can basically just sit back and say, you know what, do what you want. Here are the principles and here are your points of choosing. You can say, you know what, you don't have to use a corporate card. You can use your own card and then expense it. which means that in most cases that employee gets additional, perhaps heavy amounts of miles or points toward their favorite, Starwood, Amex, or United, MasterCard, or whatever, in which case those points are their own. And they can use those towards upgrades on future business travel on their own time. The other thing with regard to choice is that if you're setting a spending cap and you're saying, hey, if you go under this, you get something awesome. But you can also say, you know what, you can go over this if you want. You're just going to have to pay the rest yourself. And so if there's that sort of hybrid business leisure trip where you have an employee who, maybe wants to take a spouse along and wants to stay somewhere a little nicer and kind of make a hybrid work vacation out of it, that employee can spend a little more and just say, you know what, hey, I'm going to cover the difference. And these are all things that you can consider, but what it all adds up to is that a flexible travel policy is the one that if any of you entrepreneurs out there are thinking or getting to that point in your company, maybe you first are doing sales for the first time and you have employees who need to go on the road in a way that developers don't need to. These are the things to consider in what you put into your travel program, if you have one. And what I've found throughout having worked at multiple companies, having had multiple situations there, is that less is really seriously more. And you have employees traveling on the airlines that they want, staying at the hotels that they want to, or perhaps staying in Airbnb and saving you even more money. I'm currently on the road for 2 weeks, and I'm in San Francisco next week, and I opted to stay in Airbnb instead of a hotel so that I could have access to a laundry machine, which I think is going to make my coworkers much happier if I'm wearing clean clothing. And, if you take those things into account, and you say, I trust you. This is an element of freedom here. This is how I want to see you hacking your own business travel, being smart. If they find something awesome that they can do and it really impresses you, that's a better reflection of them as employees as well. So if you're at that point with your company, I encourage you to think about really making things flexible and really giving them ways to be creative so that this is just another way that they can show how that they are productive and they are efficient, dedicated employees, but who also value their own quality of life and their own individuality. And I think that, we talk about free food, you talk about like social groups at work and such, but I really think that business travel is the most effective and meaningful way that employees can show their commitment to the company and also reflect their own individuality. So I just wanted to give you something to think about.